All right, so we're going to pick up where we left off, which was this final section of the summit meeting. The summit meeting of now gauging and guiding, where you, for the first time, will really, in a sense, assert yourself in terms of directing in the midst of this discipling time that you have. And as you recall, we want to begin with a hopeful starting point. If 10 is Christ formed in you, 1 is the opposite, where do you see yourself these days? If you need to, in a sense, I guess, reinforce the idea that this is still pretty hopeful, you can always say, wow, I can't believe that despite everything, that you can hang on to a 3 rather than a 2. Or you could even then bring in the roommate or the friend or the spouse. Spouse is very tricky at times. So I haven't tried that one too much, because you could just be opening up the good old can of worms there. So I normally, though, just to reinforce what we mentioned yesterday before leaving, I normally just grab the point that they establish, and I'm happy with it. And because it does not matter. So I don't know how intensely I can really reinforce this idea. It does not matter what number they say. It's simply a way for us to start down a path of progressive sanctification, of encouragement to them, and of helping them to recognize that what is happening here, as 2 Corinthians 3:18 says, is with ever-increasing glory. It is not something that kind of falls like a bomb upon you. And then, of course, that other really great passage that we looked at yesterday in Proverbs 4, where it says, the path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of day. And so we're on the path of the righteous, and this path of righteousness is going to have that, but it actually is a bit of a counting the cost on our part too. That am I in it with this person for the long run? Am I a coach for the day, hoping that this will fix them forever? Or am I really going to have a walking with relationship and to recognize that we really want to have a church that's built on a fabric of real deep discipling one with another all the time? I mean, who here who preaches doesn't say, probably the least of what I do is preaching. Most of it is when I come down from preaching and really getting in there with people's lives. So here's a chance for us to kind of put some substance into those phrases and to make sure that that is the great thrust of our life, is really this continual walking with. And so, again, after having gauged where they are, some of the things that we just talked about, so let me move on. You then guide. And you've already role-played on this a little bit, and you guide by helping them to see where they're going to end up the next time we get together, whether that's from a 4 to a 5, 4.5, again, whatever it is. And by the way, if you're freaked out by a number, or they are, you can always find letter grades. If you want to have the Roy G. Biv spectrum where they go, or maybe it's temperature. I'm hotter now, I'm colder now. It doesn't matter. I don't think it matters to anybody, really. We just need some sort of a measurement. If you're always going to keep your hands here and here during the D times and go like that, or bring out a thermometer just for that person, hey, any of those things work around just as well. But, of course, most people understand numbers pretty easily. And then hopefully people understand, and I think it is important to understand that this is just a arbitrary point that we're establishing just to see if we're making progress. So take that as it is. But now, you're going to take all the things that they said, right? You're going to say, when you go from a 6 to a 7, what is it that you'll begin to notice that will tell you in 2 weeks' time that you went from a 6 to a 7? What will you begin to notice that will tell you that you've moved from a 6 to a 7? And this is for sure a time where you want to keep it exhaustive. That is, anything else. How about in this area of your life? Or how about with this regarding your kids, or whatever the focus area is? You do want to keep asking anything else until they're ready to say, yeah, that's pretty much everything. And the reason being is that that's them still hopefully quieted in their spirit, being able to really hear God, the Spirit, being able to guide them towards what it would look like if He really has His way with them, what it looks like when they sow to the Spirit, what it looks like also when the Spirit is able to be fully expressed through that. That's our hope anyway. Once all of that has been kind of brainstormed and exhausted and put out there, then it's time for you to get a little bit of creative as well, and to take what it is that they've said and just turn it into some sort of fun, great, focused challenge for the upcoming week or 2 weeks or whatever the period of time is that you'll be together. And the two type of tasks that you could possibly assign that I think both tend to augment or reinforce or open the way for even more spiritual formation in someone could be noticing or doing. So a noticing task, for example, would be that, we'll go back to the wanting to be intimate with God that some of you shared. It could just simply be, all right, for 3 days out of the next 7, you tell me which ones those should be. After your prayer time, I'd like you to jot in a journal or just simply make a quick voice memo or something, some way or another, where you would just simply notice what difference it made by having a more focused prayer with God. Just recognize what it was that you noticed in terms of kind of where you were, how you appreciated who you were in relation to God, who He was to you. Grab that. And that's just the noticing. But the hope is that while you're noticing, while you're journaling, that seems to be a time where likewise you are all the more taken to a place where you're in alignment with the work of God as He continues to bring you to greater and greater glory. With doing tasks, of course, Jesus says, you go and do likewise. He recognizes that by doing, you also affect the intrinsic through the extrinsic, right? So if you really want to have God to do the great thing that He promises to do in Philippians 2, where it is God who acts to will, it is God who works to act and to will according to His purposes. That is, that God is going to shape your will and also help shape your activity. The idea of doing a doing task at first may not seem as though it's shaping your will, but scripturally, that's actually how Jesus goes about that. Think about it in Matthew 6, where your treasure is, there your heart will be. Do not store up for yourself treasure here on earth where moth and rust destroy, but rather store up for yourself treasure in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be. Storing up your treasure is simply an extrinsic, obedient type activity. It is nothing at first that you would think would really shape your heart and your disposition and your appetites for all things godly. But that's the promise of Jesus here, right? Where you invest, your heart will be, implying that your heart's not already there now. And my goodness, there have been psychological study after psychological study that proves the brilliance of what Jesus has said. One, they have done it with dogs, where people have had high-maintenance dogs. And what they find is that over time, people's affection and loyalty and willingness to pay a certain amount of money to a vet to keep their dog alive increases the more that they have to take care of this high-maintenance dog. So in other words, by having to wash a wound or give medicine or really dote on a dog that becomes a high-maintenance dog, that you end up giving your heart more to that dog. Now, is it chicken or egg? Do you give your heart more to that? Do you do all of those things because you already had a heart for that dog? Most of the studies show no. That's not the way that it ended up. Normally, where your heart was prior to all of that activity was not as intense as after having done all that activity. I don't know if that all made sense. And when the vet calls and says it's going to be $1,100 to keep your dog alive, what do you want me to do? If you've given more activity and thus your heart has ended up there, suddenly your sleep number increases. By sleep number, it's at what number of dollars is it where you say, go ahead and put it. So, anyway, it's easy to think, oh, that's just external. Oh, are we just creating legalists? Oh, are we just creating people who just are going to obey and that's all? You know what? This is the approach that Jesus took. And it does ultimately have the great effect. It shapes our heart. Where your investment is, there your heart will be also. So doing tasks are not just to help people get in alignment with doing the right stuff and towing the line for the body of Christ, doing tasks are also invaluable for us to be able to really be shaped. And of course, we know for sure the great strength of doing tasks when we practice it in a more intentional way, because of James saying, do not merely listen to the word, James 1:22, and so deceive yourselves, do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in the mirror, and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they've heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. And then Jesus likewise, while preaching on the Sermon on the Mount about where your treasure is, where your investment is, there your heart will be also, he concludes all of that brilliance with the wise and the foolish builders. Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Right. They both hear, but it's the one who puts it into practice who ends up having that solid foundation and that steadfastness, that steel in the spine of your soul to be able to help you to weather whatever it is that comes your way. So, I mean, there's great reason to do a lot of doing tasks, namely because it is the very path that Jesus knows will bring us to a place where the Holy Spirit shapes us and strengthens us all the more. So a noticing task is notice when things go well, what was different, how did it happen, and the difference that it made. You may give them the same question that you're asking, is what difference did it make, and how did that invite even more work of the Spirit in you? A doing task is to act as if the miracle has already occurred, in the ways that you just described with the activities that would tell you move from a 6 to a 7. And those things that they talked about that they would notice having done, well, just make them a doing task. You don't want to overwhelm them, but pick something you think would be a reasonable thing to do and to be able to come back together again. And I think it's often great to combine a doing task with a noticing task. So, for example, this week, here's what would be great is, as you've been shining back at the workplace, is try and do this. That the first person that you talk to in the workplace, somehow talk to them about what's going on with your life with Jesus in some way or another. And so that's the doing. But then afterwards, when you go back to your desk, just make a quick little jot down about what difference that made in your connection with all things kingdom. How did that likewise invite the Holy Spirit to be able to prove to be the paraclete, to prove to be your supporter at those particular times? So again, there's multiple iterations of what it is that you can do here, and it's not something that you should be thinking of ahead of time. It is that simply that you should be ready to hear clearly what they would notice that would tell them that they moved from point X to point X plus 1. Right? Whatever it is that they notice, those just become the tasks to some degree or another. But then what you need to do, though, is either you remember it or you jot it down, one way or another. But if we're going to be deliberate, if we're going to be diligent in these matters, give ourselves wholly to them so that everyone may see our progress, well, we got to keep seeing where those stakes in the ground are. And that if X is this spot and X plus 1 is this spot, what is it that we ask them to do to go from X to X plus 1? And jot it down so that the next time that you come together, even if they forget, you can give a bit of a reminder at that point in time. And then when you come back together again, it'll be a much more deliberate meeting, but I think it's also one where it's so hopeful. Because, the first time they may forget. First time you may forget. That's been my experience as well. But if we're really going to be disciplined about this, then we will end up on this great path of training. And by the way, if we're going to be world class, we really shouldn't be forgetting at this point. Right. I think if we've dedicated ourselves to really running in such a way to get the crown, then that would be the case. But it's also why I would encourage you either to set up journal pages or to use the worksheet that we've got here. It's nothing very complicated about this worksheet. It's really just like 4 lines. But it's amazing how just these 4 little stupid lines somehow provide enough structure so that we're suddenly launched into a path of greater progress in our relationship for discipling there. So, what we're going to do now, though, is before we jump into the follow-up to all of that, is I'd like you guys to take a moment and just give it a shot at hearing. You're going to finish where you finished yesterday. You're just going to go right to the moment of, you go from X to X plus 1, right? You go from 6 to 7. What do you begin to notice? Let the other person that you're in this role play with then start to tell you. And your job is to do your best to feel like you're teasing out or drawing out, bringing out all of what would help you to then establish those next steps. You then want to establish next steps with clarity and make it actionable, make it achievable, all the good things that are specific, measurable, all things that will help you to show progress the next time you come together. And, that good old acronym of SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. I think we understand that implicitly, but we don't need another acronym at this point, so I'm not going to have a slide, and I'm not going to elaborate on that. But I think we understand explicitly that it's got to be something that you can look at now and look at then and help the person to appreciate the progress that they've made. Not just that I would feel better or I'd be more loving or, obviously, how would it show itself? How would it show itself? And you would refine that to a place where it is tangible, where it is somewhat measurable, and also a point of progress and a point of encouragement for them on this path towards ever-increasing glory as we become like Christ. So whether you want to mix it up and have different groups for a little bit today, that maybe is going to be fun for you. But go ahead and get into groups of 3. It does not matter, guy or girl, at all. And you're going to start right just where I said. What are you going to notice as you go from 6 to 7 that will tell you that you've moved up this scale, that will tell you that you've made progress? And keep bringing that out, and then just see how it goes at giving some sort of a next step. Do you have a question?
I think you probably said this, but the goal is to encourage them to bring that out instead of us telling them. I know you said that, but
yeah. So
that we're not, because it's their idea. I've seen they embrace it and they want to do it instead of saying, "Here's what you should do."
Exactly, for sure. That this is all generated by them. All you're doing is kind of culling the information well and repackaging it in a way that is going to be easily a point of progress for when you come together again. All right? So go ahead and break it out. I'll give you timers as we go.
Come on, baby. You ready, dude? Coach? Coach?
Marshall's in the zone.
Yeah.
Hey, Marshall, we're done with the video. All right, into the role play, as we just talked about.
We're back.